Hi, David. Thanks for coming today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right. So, before we will start, would you mind to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's David Nolen. I'm a software engineer, and I'm probably best known as being the lead developer of the ClojureScript open source project. ClojureScript is a version of Clojure that compiles to JavaScript.
Great, great. Before you got into programming and building ClojureScript, you actually studied in the school topics that have nothing in common in programming, right? It were
But
topics related to media. Yeah, yeah. So would you mind to tell what drew you to it and how did you ended up being a developer?
yeah, I mean, so my father bought a computer for our family when I was pretty young. Like it was like I think I was 8, my brother was 7, and of course we wanted to play video games, and our father refused to buy video games. He said, "Make your own video games." So we went to the public library and we got some books on basic programming. So we got, Apple Basic. It was our first computer was a Apple IIgs, which was kind of a funny, computer because it was like an Apple and it was compatible with Apple II software, but it also had this like Macintosh like GUI thing going on. Anyways, it was a really neat computer, and we got into
Yes.
programming through AppleSoft Basic. That was our interest. But I had a few other passions. One of those was like drawing and animation. I was really into that, and that ended up taking more of my attention as I got older. And then I got into film. I got into film. My father was really into cinema, and so that
Mhm.
rubbed off on me. And so I actually went to school, university for film, um,
Mhm.
and not for computer science. Yeah. But
Not for
but again, as you could, to be clear, I was interacting with computers since a very young age, and learning how to write programs at a very young age as well. And it was also a
yeah.
bit easier. It was also a bit easier because my brother was also into it. So we would like, he would work on something and I would work on something, and we'd like, oh, check this out. I made this thing, and he would make something else. So there was also like this very like, very friendly sibling rivalry who could make the coolest computer programs. So that
Yeah,
helped.
yeah, that's great. That's great. Actually, yeah, when I was 8, also I got lucky. I got a chance to start programming in Quick Basic on
Yeah.
Atari, and later on, my neighbor bought a computer, which was like pretty expensive for the time, and my neighbor started programming, so I started with them in Turbo Pascal. And
Very
when my
cool.
kids were 7 and 8, I actually started teaching them first in Scratch. And now the younger one is interested a little bit more in
Yeah.
programming. So we do some closure together.
Oh, cool. Cool.
Yeah, yeah, we do like choose your own adventure game. I think these like it's a state machine, so state machines are quite easy to explain to kids in
Yeah.
Lisp even more.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's great.
um, so you started extremely young. You started building games, but later on you switched to do web applications, or what did you build exactly?
It was a very roundabout. When I started out, I was more interested in like game development when I was young. But I went to film school, and then I decided I wanted to go to grad school. So I went to NYU. They had a new media program, and I was
Mhm.
very interested in at the time. It was kind of like there was this person, John Maida. He was at MIT in this group called the Aesthetics and Computation Group. And like
Mhm.
actually my interest in film was actually sort of experimental film and sort of
Yeah.
art films. I love narrative stuff, but I also was really interested in experimental stuff. And I saw this sort of similarity between John Maida's digital artworks and some of the experimental film work. Um, so I was like, oh, I got to get back into programming. If I want to make this like digital art or generative art, I got to like get back into that. And before I went to New York to study, I actually was like, oh, I'm going to learn two things. I'm going to remember how to program C because I did a little bit of C when I was a teenager. But then I was like, I'm going to remind myself how to do C, but then I'm going to learn Scheme. I'd never done any Lisp. I'd never done any Lisp, but I got the structure and interpretation of computer programs,
Yeah.
and C was just like remembering how to do it, really. But I'd never seen Scheme before, and so
Mhm.
Scheme was like, um, I mean, it was like almost like a religious experience. It was like so mind blowing. I mean, it because I had learned Pascal, I'd learned Basic, I did C and C++, and sort of I kind of knew the sort of ALGOL sort of structured
Yes.
programming approach, and I'd never seen anything like Lisp, and where metaprogramming was like like a part of the introduction to the
It
to
was
this to the language.
much much easier to express yourself, right? And then you were using software, let's say programming languages to build visual art, right? Which is kind of very different paradigm from building computer games, then building web applications. So you are most likely fast learner. When you want to learn new paradigm, or when you want to start doing new thing, like if you wanted to create new, I don't know, version control, if you wanted to compete with Git, how would you learn how to create a product that competes with the status quo?
Yeah, so I would say no. I mean, now that I'm further in my career, I know a bit more about data structures. There's still gaps in my knowledge there. Being into Clojure helped because Clojure has fairly sophisticated data structures. They're more sophisticated than the basic textbook stuff you find at school. So you do learn a bit just by looking at those. But in general, I would say when I was starting, what I always wanted from programming, like I think people look at me and they think they think like I know a lot of stuff. But actually, I tried to explain once, my thing about programming is that when I was doing basic, my experience of programming is I turn on the computer and you hold down the programmer button on the back of the machine, and then you immediately get a programming prompt. And as you write the program, you can modify the program in memory while it's
Yeah,
executing. I mean that. So my first experience of software development was interactive software development. It was very easy to see changes to modify a program in memory, and you know until I encountered Lisp, I thought this was very specific to BASIC. I didn't realize that the idea of modifying running programs was much older than BASIC, and that people had done a lot of work. It was way later that I learned about like Common Lisp and the Common Lisp computers and Smalltalk. And my approach, and I think people thought it was futuristic, was that like programming should be interactive, and my interest in Clojure and actually was like it really literally was I want to make digital art, but I want to be able to live code it. I don't want to have to sit there and like compile and
yeah,
wait and see the bug, compile and wait, see the bug. I want the program to be like a living thing. And I think
yeah,
that's also related to my background as like, when I wanted to be an illustrator, I wanted to do art. To me, art wasn't like sitting around and waiting for something to happen and then being like, okay, I made a mistake and starting over. You're like, you make a mistake, you take your pencil, you erase it, or you are painting and you cover it up, or you adjust. You work with the thing. It's like the material is alive. And I think if I was brought anything to my approach to software was that I want software to be a more um, living process, a more dynamic interaction with the computer. And I think that you know, and you say that there's a difference between whatever. But I mean, as you can see, it didn't matter where, it didn't matter what I was doing. I was like, as long as I can get like an interactive development, like I want, it's like I want interactive development on iOS apps. I want it on the web. I wanted it when I was doing stuff
yeah,
in grad school, and I was doing. So I would say that's the common theme. Was that Lisp to me was like a very radical philosophy about our relationship to programming and our and
yeah.
that approach to software. And I most of my career has been like, I want that flexibility and that dynamism, regardless of what type of system I'm
Yeah.
building.
Also, one thing that comes to my mind. So when I asked you this question, you started immediately speaking about data structures. The older I am, the less I think programming is about algorithms, and the more it is about data structures. Because when you describe the problem well, or when you find good data structures, even algorithms might become self-descriptive and much easier. So, and on top of that, when you speak about interactive development, uh, Clojure is dynamic language for a good reason, especially in that early stage when you don't know exactly what you want to achieve. You just experiment. You have some data. You can change them. You don't model any domain. You just save data. You read data from somewhere. You change them and send them elsewhere. And I get it. So when you want to start doing something new, you just start experimenting, playing with the thing, and then it just works, and you become productive. Or do you do like proper study of the field, read papers and books?
I mean, again, if you'd asked me maybe 10 years ago, I would give a different answer. I'm further along in my career now, and now I definitely I see the benefits of doing a bit of research, thinking through the problem. Like, I definitely believe in this sort of like um, more hammock driven sort of development. Like, and by that, I don't mean like just sitting around and just thinking all the time. I definitely not what I'm talking about. But I definitely believe in like some preparation. And then there's a certain point where I'm like, okay, I have thought about this. I have a general sense of the terrain. Now it's time to go do some walking. Like, you're drawing, you
Yes,
drew an area, you saw some, you did your research, you took an aerial photo, but nothing beats actually walking through the landscape and experiencing it firsthand. And, you know, um, yeah, so I would say hopefully I've found more of a balance. I like to know a bit about what I'm getting into, but then of course I don't feel like I can really know what's going on until I can like get my hands dirty.
yes. But you have become web applications developer, and then you switch to become a database developer. And there are people who study databases for decades to be
Yeah,
data developers. What skill set do you need to be a database developer?
and so, let's. I was on the Datomic team, but I was only there for a short time. To be very clear, um, Datomic was a system and it had many components, and I didn't work actually on the database side of it. I mean, I would say in a large part that was most likely just Rich and Stu's the original design, and to be, and I think that's like something that like Rich is extremely good at, is sort of the fundamental design of the thing, the fundamental data structures, as well as the fundamental algorithms. By the time I came onto Datomic, I was not involved in that part.
Hmm.
Really, a lot of the stuff that I was doing was around like data format stuff. I mean, so um, it might not be obvious, but in some sense, transit was a part of some of the things we were working on was related to Datomic, and so a lot of the work that I did was around transit while I was there. That was a big chunk of my work on Datomic.
Okay.
There were some back end stuff that I did work on, but again, it wasn't the sort of super in the internals. It was definitely more like infrastructure related stuff.
Okay. I always thought that transit is like a natural extension of EDN and um, a gift to the world because let's say EDN and Clojure, how Clojure encodes data is much better than JSON or
Yeah.
YML. Uh, it's let's say not only stronger or descriptive, safer, unambiguous, better to parse, serialize and unserialize, and so on. So I thought, okay, transit is just okay. We have this great thing here. Let's show it to the world. And so how is this related to Datomic and not to Clojure itself?
I mean, I would say, there's lots of things I can't talk about specifically about my time on Datomic. But I would say that like, I mean, if you know about Datomic, Datomic has like this like machine to machine data format, which
Mhm.
is freshen, right? Right. Just like, it's like yeah, like it encodes things in this super compact binary format. And then, of course, if you want to extend the types of things, systems you can talk to, transit is the natural fit, right? And so
Mhm.
there were, it's like transit is much more generic. But when I was there, there was some experimentation around like, you know, um, having Datomic communicate with other systems. And transit was kind of like a new closure friendly protocol, which has lots of use cases. But that was one of the use cases, was like, kind of experimenting with that.
Okay, okay. And also you might have wanted clients for many different languages, and if EDN is used in Datomic, you might want to use Transit, which is in a way the same thing, right?
It's a good conclusion, right? JSON is available in more places, and the freshen format is much harder to implement, I would say.
Okay, okay. Let's switch back to web applications. So a while ago, you had a presentation on demand-driven architecture. For people who haven't seen it, maybe people will know more about the pattern that's nowadays called backend for frontend, where the frontend is driving what exactly the data it wants to get. So it has an opportunity to, let's say, query the backend, say what data it wants. It might include some filtering, paging, and things like that. And in the mainstream development, there have been people moving from REST API to GraphQL, and now it seems to me that people are moving back. And but Clojure and ClojureScript is not JavaScript, and we have other tools like Datalog. Um, how do you look at the situation? Let's say if you have a ClojureScript application and if you want to implement demand-driven architecture, backend for frontend, what are your options in comparison with, let's say, mainstream JavaScript developers?
To be honest, when the GraphQL thing was sort of happening in the beginning, which is now like, it's almost 10 years ago. It's nobody in the closure world was really adopting it. It was definitely more like, and when I talked about demand-driven architecture, it was definitely more about the philosophy than it was like GraphQL as a specific technology. I think part of the issue is that GraphQL is, I would definitely describe it as like, in many ways, like it involved a lot of concerns. It also, I think, involved a lot of changes to the back end that people weren't prepared to do. Um, it also, I think, implied a certain level of scale that maybe people didn't need to be concerned with. It's like, a lot of things was like, at least for closure, I was like, you could just like, for example, adopt only the parts of that philosophy that matter. And, back when I was talking about demand-driven architecture, that's what I was trying to describe, was that like, oh, the client can be in control of the thing without getting into a big thing called GraphQL and like how to integrate databases, how to integrate microservices. Those problems I think are like, are fundamentally complicated. So that's what I would say about that, is like, demand driven architecture was never, in my opinion, about GraphQL, but was like wearing a different hat. I
Yeah.
definitely think backend for front end is, a, in many ways, just a different name for that particular thing. People want to come up with these words because they want to like, capture mind share. But in the end, what matters is that yes, certain clients need certain things, and why send um unnecessary amounts of information to clients where they can't do anything with it. I
Yeah.
definitely think that was the key thing, is that people build these extremely generic APIs with no thought for that, they aren't well suited for specific clients.
Yeah.
They're not a great fit.
Yes, yes. You're right. On one side, there is, let's say, resource-based REST API where more or less each database table has its own endpoint, and when you need data from 5 tables, you need to send 5 requests. On the other side, GraphQL might mean that basically you have to expose all your, or a major part of your data model in GraphQL. And when you want to add business logic on top of that, you have to somehow connect to all this querying. So you can't just, let's say, embed a library and say, okay, I'll expose this database as GraphQL. And then there might be some middle point where you don't do 5 queries, where you do just one, but at the same time you don't have to like expose everything and make everything connected and somehow add your business logic on top of that. So it means basically building custom APIs which are based only for that given frontend, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And this might be, let's say, quite like classic how people do this nowadays when they really prepare the API specification, they develop the endpoint. But there might be other ways, like look at Dustin Gets Electric, where
Hmm.
you can call backend from frontend and vice versa without visibly paying anything with your like adding abstractions, designing APIs. You just call it, it happens. But isn't it too magic?
Now that like that since I've never used electric, I can't really say. I mean, it's the devil is always in the details. In general, I don't want to say it's anything specific. I mean, I know Dustin. Like I know Dustin from the Clojure community for a long time. He's a nice fellow. Um,
Yeah,
since I haven't used it, I can't say that much. I think I agree with the sense that like people have tried to solve this problem many times, and I would
yeah,
say that like it's never what we know. There's been enterprise solutions that claim to do this. There's been open source solutions that claim to do this. And I think I would say the level of success these things have achieved has never been that significant, because in
yeah,
the end, I I think the problem often boils down to people are building all kinds of things and making a thing that works for um many different people is very, very hard. I think it's why um yeah, there's never been like, regardless of what people have used, there's never been like a great framework that you could say is well suited to every problem. It just doesn't, my experience, it just doesn't exist. You
yeah,
can um you know I think, when you start out, you can choose certain things. Like you can be like, yes, I'm going to build sort of a crud web app, right? And then like that's like a very like nicely sort of boxed thing you want to do, and there are expectations from your users about what that means. But then you want to do, like, I don't know, you want to do Google spreadsheets, or you want to do a Figma, or whatever. You want to do something else, and then
yeah,
you've chosen a problem which doesn't fit in any box, that really, a box that's the same for everyone, right? Um,
yeah,
so
yes.
that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, when you are building a framework, you are more or less trying to encode the way how you solve problems, how you are thinking. And so you build OM next. Maybe your thinking, how front end should be done, has changed. Dustin has this approach how front end development, front end and back end development should be done. There are actually examples of this being done. When you look at MATLAB, Mathematica, Jupyter, Observable, NextJournal, all of them have to connect the front end, which must be extremely interactive. It's a REPL, more or less, with the backend, which it can't run on a client. Sometimes you might be, I don't know, calculating collisions of black holes, and you might need a cluster to calculate it. And you need to remove the gap between front end and back end as much as possible.
Right.
Yet I love Mathematica, but when you work with Mathematica, the UI seems a little bit clunky from time to time, and it might be slow. And also, it's a beautiful language, and I like it. It's just it's complex and it's single purpose. The developers of
Yeah.
Mathematica just one thing to do, and it's to build IDE, as good IDE as possible. All the glory and all the best to them. They are doing great job, but still, it's one purpose. So if you were building, let's say, demand-driven architecture, if you were working with backend for front-end pattern, how would you approach it? If you were building highly interactive application like a new Mathematica or MATLAB.
I mean that again, I would have to think a lot about that. I would definitely have to do some research. It's not something that I sit down and think about doing, to be honest. Like I've
Yeah.
definitely, I used to be, I used to have kitchen table coders, and the kitchen table coders, one of the people there was Kovas Baguta, and he actually came from Mathematica, so he was
Okay.
working on that problem. He was working on that problem way back in the day, and it was pretty cool. He had some neat demos, integrating OpenGL, integrating, trying to get Datomic into that mix. I definitely think there is a lot of interesting work happening in this area, like as you said, like Clerk, um, Jupyter notebooks, all this stuff. It's totally cool, and I think that, in fact, quite a bit of innovation has occurred. I would say, like, bringing collaboration and copying of notebooks and modification of notebooks and being able to see the history. I mean, the online social element of notebooks is, in my opinion, like very distinct from the sort of like one person at their Mathematica notebook working on their own notebook. I definitely think the network layer adds a lot. I mean, I definitely think you could argue that the availability of these notebooks that are easy to copy and share definitely contributed to, like, how quickly people were able to adopt these new machine learning techniques and to sort of disseminate that knowledge. Um, so I think there's definitely a lot there, but as to, my own feeling about how I would do that, to me it's like I look at that space and like a lot of people are doing cool work. It's great. I'm not spending too much time thinking about that myself.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's still there are examples, so you might probably ending up looking at how others are doing it, and then see
Yeah.
what you can add. Right. Yeah. Before jumping to other development topics, so you do presentations on many different things, not only development. So you were speaking about Go, not the programming language, and about music. So are these things like your biggest hobbies, or something that where you spend your time when you are not programming, or was it just a coincidence you wanted to speak about those topics?
I mean, yeah, no, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, they're very much hobbies. I do, like, I would say, yeah, go and music are both two passions of mine. Um, Go actually around the time, and maybe that's why I kind of relate those two. It's like I picked up Go right around the time I picked up Lisp, right? So those two things um, was where I was getting into them at about the same time. Um, and then music has definitely like been like a thing since I was about really a teenager. I mean, since I was probably 6 or 7, I wanted to play piano. I mean, for various reasons, like I wasn't able to get piano lessons when I was young, even though I was really excited about that.
Yeah.
I have picked it up a little bit on my own. But mostly it's like, I do play guitar. I should be better at guitar than I am. Um, but given how much time I spend on it, but a lot of the music stuff is like I do play music. I have like a collaborator. We've been working on stuff for many years together. Um, and like music is definitely like a passion. I really enjoy making music. I enjoy learning about music.
Yeah.
Definitely recently more interested in learning about like improvisation and theory. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and old music, I mean, interested in all kinds of music, but definitely more interested
Yeah.
in the history of music now.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, that's definitely a passion. I would say the music is not so like, um, I think there's for me there's fewer maybe parallels with music than for me personally, maybe because maybe if I was a composer, like a real composer who would sit down and like come up with a melody and try to make it work and really try and like really architect something, maybe I
Yeah.
would find music to be a bit more like programming, but I don't think of music that way so much. Music for me is far more like more like a collaboration, sort of improv, and we'll see where it goes. Go,
yeah,
maybe it's easier for me to make connections between the activity and like software and how we think about software and software design. And that's kind of why I like it. It's it's one of these things that's not so popular in the US. It is reasonably popular in Europe. There's a European Go Federation. It's pretty big there. And then of course it's massively popular in Asia. Um,
yeah,
yeah, and like of course, I like talking about it because it's you can talk about it now and it's like basically a household term because of AlphaGo, right? I mean, AlphaGo in many ways is like this sort of moment where the sort of people got really interested in neural networks again.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so
Back
yeah,
then,
people are familiar with it.
yeah, and back then when AlphaGo became that good, it was a huge surprise, right? Chess was already like humans were, whereas Kasparov was beaten, but in Go people said not in the next 2 decades. It's
Yeah,
impossible, and yet
yeah.
it happened. It happened in less than a decade
Mhm.
after Kasparov lost, and people were no longer better at chess.
Yeah.
Yeah, now Stockfish, which anybody can download, is like 500 or 600 elo points better than Magnus Carlsen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's so good that humans have no chance
No
to
chance.
get no chance to get as good as computers. And now we speak about Stockfish, which is built by community. It's not like multi-billion-dollar project built by the best engineers and researchers. And and in Go, I guess things go a little bit slower. And also, did AlphaGo actually help the best players to become even better? Like, did they learn anything?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean that's I don't want to like spend a whole thing on AI. A lot. There's a lot of ill will towards AI, and definitely there are
Yeah,
things that I don't like, especially the LLM variant. But I don't really want to talk about that. AlphaGo, the arrival of AlphaGo, definitely I would say, um, there's an effect which I think most people that are not in the community aren't aware of, which is that you now have a teaching tool, right? So like you can now review your game with AI, right? In the past, the only way you could get a review is to talk to somebody who's stronger than you. Now you can
yeah,
like fire up, you know, these deep learning based Go playing bots, and you can have it analyze the position. You can have it explain what it was thinking. Um, they're really great for learning. If after you've talked to people about the big concepts, it's a great way to check big concepts to be like, oh, that was the most important place to play, or this was the most important place to
yeah,
play. And yes, the top professional, the number one player in the world now is this Korean Shin Jinsa, and he's famous for training with AI. He trains with AI,
yeah,
and he definitely attributes heavily his sort of understanding of the AI approach,
yes,
in sort of altering his approach to the game, and you know um, contributing to his results. I mean, other people are trying to, but in some sense, Shinjansa is a bit younger. I think he was like 16 when AlphaGo came out, so he
yeah,
was he was able to be at the cusp of this transformation. I think take advantage of it. I imagine that as new young top pros come up, that the AI style will people it will have an even more
yeah,
um, a bigger
yeah,
effect.
yeah,
But in the end, it doesn't really change. It's funny. It's like um, yeah, I would, in many ways, at least for the amateur, I'm an amateur. I'm not very good. I mean, having AI is definitely it's a positive effect, right? Because I have
yeah,
not I got to play with people, but it's great to have this tool. I can talk
yeah,
to people. I can use this tool. I mean, it's like the chess player. I mean, if you look at a chess player now, of course
yeah,
they check their records with the computer. It doesn't detract from playing against another human, playing in tournaments, all that stuff.
yeah, yeah. So if we speak about chess, I know a little bit about chess. When I was a kid, I was playing chess competitively. So back then, people were memorizing 5 to 10 moves. Now with
Yeah,
AI, people are memorizing often 15 moves,
yeah.
and they prepare for a tournament, they prepare 30, 40 different combinations and they
Yeah.
see how opponents react. And if they are as good as they expect, they always play close to what's seen as optimal,
Yeah.
because all of them prepare with Stockfish, Leela, one of those like top
Yeah.
engines.
Yeah.
So actually, the game itself where people play, sometimes it used to start by the move 5, maybe 6, 7. Now sometimes you see there is like 15 moves of preparation.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
middle
Yeah.
game, you have to do it yourself. The computer
Yes.
is not
Yes.
there. So you
Yes.
have to
Yes.
have those skills in your head, but at the same time, the endings, like the space of all possibilities in chess is much smaller than in Go. So
Yeah.
end games have been calculated long before Stockfish.
Yeah.
So grandmasters, they know what to do to win
And
with certain. Yeah. Go ahead.
no, no, and to your point, I mean, I think it's why Go is still like, I think in chess, I'm not a chess player, but my understanding of chess is that the opening is still very critical, right? To having like a key advantage, especially between two equally strong people. Whereas
Yeah.
like Go, I mean, it's true, but I feel like looking at recent pro games, there's definitely been a lot of change. I mean, some of it's still AI influenced, but I feel like when I've looked at recent pro games, there is now it's because it's been a while. There's a return to experimentation, but I don't want to that. Of course, I could talk about Go for hours. And if you're a software person, I definitely like, yeah, you learn some Go. It's a fascinating game. It's in many ways I also love it because it is learning Go is more like a language. It's much
Yeah.
more like a language than a game. And maybe that's why, because there's this sort of linguistic connection in the same way that I was very interested in programming languages and how programming languages shape our thought processes. Maybe that's why I'm particularly attracted to the game. I think chess is great. I actually dabble in it now and then. I think chess is amazing, but maybe
Yeah.
that's why I have a personal, stronger connection to Go.
I think Go will be significantly more about your brain power and less about memorization. But at the same time, when you said like the opening is important, the opening is very important for really good players. When you are just a beginner or club player, you learn some basic opening, Italian game, London system, things like that. You play the same moves every single time, and actually um, blunders and tactics is what's going
Yeah.
to win the games, or
Mm.
blunder the opponent and not making blunders yourself. While in Go, I guess it's way more strategic, and you have to think multiple moves in advance, right?
Yeah, though, in the end, I mean, I think the more I play and the stronger that I get, I do practice still with some frequency. I mean, I now appreciate the intuition. Go is surprisingly it does leave room for intuition at critical moments, especially in the middle game. I mean, the middle game is actually my weakest part. It's like yeah, and I think it's what you're saying with chess. Even like, there's a certain point you can go, and at a certain point, your true ability has to take over, and you
Yeah,
have to be a bit more creative because there's no guideposts. And again, that's why I think people love chess and people love Go. Even with computers clearly being better than us, I think the feeling of jumping out into the wilderness and like having to fend for
yeah.
yourself is a great feeling. Yeah,
Okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah, so I'm not going to torture you all the time with Go. It's
yeah,
just
yeah,
I don't know many people who play Go, and this game has been interesting for me for a very long time. Even like
yeah,
you have just two colors of rocks,
yeah,
and
yeah.
still the game have so many more possibilities. But let's jump back to programming. So how is it to be a programming language developer? Like in
Um, you
Go
know,
as a developer,
Yeah, I would say, that's a great question, but to be in many respects, I fell into this role. I was, I like I said, I carried a passion for Lisp with me, like since basically I think 2001, 2002. I learned Scheme. I was like, I want one day I'd love to program in this, in a Lisp. And then around 2011, when ClojureScript came out, I was there when Rich Hickey presented it for the first time in New York. And I was like, okay, this is awesome. I definitely want to help out. And I don't think I've actually ever made a commit to Clojure, the programming language, the actual Clojure programming, Clojure JVM. And then within like 2 or 3 months of ClojureScript being out, I submitted a patch for a reify, an implementation of reify for ClojureScript. And Rich was like, "All right, cool. You have commit rights." And so I was given access to Jira and commit rights. And honestly, I worked on ClojureScript because I was like, I want to use this, And it was very much like I was working, but then after work, I would go hack on ClojureScript and
Yeah,
help people's patches come through, and then really out of the blue, React, after 3 years of 2.5 years of open source development on ClojureScript. React happened, and then
yeah,
I did my little React prototype. It was this initial idea, and then kind of overnight with the appearance of Ohm, and then shortly thereafter Reagent appeared almost instantly. Once
yeah,
these two libraries were available, it was kind of just massively adopted by the Clojure community,
yeah,
and I think the sort of doing UI development in Clojure and sort of web-based UI development, back end, front end. There was a complete story, and I think that really um, created a lot of enthusiasm in the community, and it was really cool to see.
yes. So now you have been the core developer of ClojureScript for how many years?
I mean, since 2012, so it's been about 13 years.
13 years. And what's the hardest on being a language developer?
In the early days, the hard thing was like, I want people to use it, it's just like evangelism. And, it's like evangelism and making it work better, getting rid of the bugs, achieving parity with Clojure, making sure that people felt that if something went wrong, they could debug it, integrating with third party libraries. I mean, there's all these constraints, right? In order to be a production ready thing that um, a serious industrial software developer is going to want to use, somebody who has experience with, reliable tools. It's a lot of work to get something to a place where, again, somebody with experience is willing to use the thing. They don't want to use a thing that feels risky, right? I mean, even though people think Clojure developers are crazy, but the thing is, Clojure's at this point, it's old. It's old, and actually, I think that people in the Clojure community love Clojure because it doesn't change. It feels very reliable. Old things work. Things aren't just changing. And at the same time, the language gives us such powerful tools that
Yeah,
we're able to adopt new strategies, new approaches, and yet have this beautiful, stable core. So, in fact, I would say that it gives you so much space to like work on your problem and apply novelty if your problem requires it, and you're not wasting those cycles on like my dependencies broke, some library I'm using, changed, and the language changed. There's all these things that I mean, if you've been doing it, I've done Node.js development, React Native development, and there are a lot of things in React Native development. As cool as the technology is, it is a lot of time wasted on things I can't control, or iOS development or Android development, right? These
yeah,
platforms, they change, and there's a lot of our time that is spent doing things that have nothing to do with our actual problems.
yeah, yeah. Like Swift has over 200 reserved keywords.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, JavaScript ecosystem. It's not. It seems to me it's not changing that much. But let's say the first between, or let's say after 2015, the years, let's say 7 years after 2015, it was like you were expected more or less to change your dev stack somehow every couple of months.
Yeah.
Frameworks were changing so much that like Angular 1 came out and a year later, Angular 2 came out and it killed Angular 1 to the point where you couldn't even find developers willing to work on Angular 1 code base. So the companies that
Yeah.
invest money into Angular 1 projects, they had to rewrite it
Yeah.
because it was like abandonware at that point. It was extremely incompatible. The whole, let's say,
Yep.
mindset of the framework has changed a lot. React has changed as well a couple of times. Moved to components and moved to hooks. And when you compare it in Clojure, it's not like this. It's slower. And still, I believe ClojureScript is ahead of time. So you don't need the change because you are already in the future. However, when you are a language developer and you can't clone yourself, and then there is like the compiler, standard library, error messages, support for browsers, etc., etc. How do you prioritize between all this? How do you decide what to work on today?
I mean, again, so ClojureScript development has slowed mostly because, I mean, I think it's pretty good for um, day in, day out development. Also, ClojureScript by itself doesn't have many bells and whistles, and it's never going to have bells and whistles. And I would say I think Shadow, like Shadow is extremely popular. Shadow CLJS is an extremely popular tool. It has really a great sort of UX and stuff, and like it has a lot of features. And I feel like people mostly go to that if they need some sort of build feature or what have you. So really, closure development, it's very narrow. It's generally going to be I would say now it's almost all bug fixes. You know, periodically, I would say every 2 or 3 months, somebody points out a pretty weird bug that was missed, and we go and fix that. And then there are like things that that we work on that are like features that we think could improve the way that we use ClojureScript, or it's about parity. Like for example, Clojure got method values, and we're trying to figure out, is that a good idea for ClojureScript? Does that make sense? And maybe its primary value is just so that people can write shared code, and there's no syntax difference. You don't have to use reader conditionals. Reader conditionals are great, but you would like that to be a special case, right?
Yeah.
So these days, I mean, ClojureScript development is like me being like, okay, I think we should work on this, and then actually Thomas Heller from who works on Shadow and like um, my brain's breaking. Babashka. Um,
Yeah. Work group.
um,
Mission.
yes, Bork dude. Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
Mikko Borkent, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, he has a couple of ClojureScript dialects as well, and so I propose something, and then like there'll be like a sort of like I'll propose something, and it's like, oh, okay, you're right, that's not a good idea, or they'll have an alternative, and so there's a lot of brainstorming. To be honest, I think a lot of my time is spent brainstorming, not even writing code. It's either fixing bugs or brainstorming how to do something in a way that's not going to create a huge headache. That's going to
Yeah.
be backwards compatible. I mean, those honestly are the things those are the things that we focus on now. It's like, how can we add a thing? How can the impact be only like mostly positive? How can we
Yeah.
not break backwards compatibility? Um, yeah, because I mean, again, we people use ClojureScript all the time, and my general impression is that people are like, it's great, and it's working
Yes.
for them. There are things that I would love to do, but it's hard. It's without more work, it's like, and the value is like less. It's like, yeah, that we could do some refactoring, or we could spend a bit of time with performance. But then again, those are not the high priority items. I think the high priority items these days are very much, we don't like bugs. We want parity with Clojure.
Yeah.
That's probably the primary things. And
Yeah.
then the third thing is, how can we make people's lives easier when integrating
Yeah.
with the existing JavaScript ecosystem, um, in such a way that it works well for ClojureScript, but also leads to benefits for the other build tools as well.
Yes. Yes. But the decision-making process of what to include in ClojureScript is based on Clojure itself as a reference implementation, I guess with one exception. So one of the rules or one of the principles of Clojure is that it's not trying to hide underlying platform. It's pretty open that it's running on JVM. ClojureScript also is not hiding, it's running on JavaScript. So when do you hide the platform? When do you hide that it's running on JavaScript to make it more like the JVM Clojure, and then you will just like keep it more compatible with JavaScript world?
I mean, we don't really try to do much hiding. Like, people are,
Yeah,
when ClojureScript first came out, people were very confused. People thought there was a runtime. There's no runtime, right? There's no runtime support for anything. It's literally just JavaScript that's executing, and the REPL makes it seem like there's a runtime, but the REPL's not even the REPL's not even in JavaScript, right? The
yeah,
REPL is just like talking through some port to a Java process. But that's like a really clever design choice, right? But the REPL sort of allowed us to avoid needing any runtime support for anything. So I would say, as a general rule, I think that we've adopted the philosophy of like we don't really do that much to hide the platform. There's some interop things that it's hard to gloss over, but for the
yeah,
most part, we've tried our best, and then some things worked out in our favor. For example, like you know the iterator protocol, the iterable protocol in JavaScript was nice because then it could take a
yeah,
vector or a map or whatever. Um, then there's other like protocols, and Clojure script implements these ES6 protocols, and that's improved interop. But yeah, I mean, there's limits to what we're gonna do, and yeah, we don't try to like paper over it too much. And at the same time, I would say for a long time, ClojureScript was a bit unique in that. In the early days, there were lots of JavaScript dialects that were kind of like, okay, there were so many of them. Um, and they were like, I would say they were like in the sort of coffee script school of like, yeah, it's just like sugar over JavaScript.
yeah,
ClojureScript was much more ambitious, but generally speaking, the other ambitious things were typed. They were typed languages like
yeah.
Elm or whatever. And there's
Pure script.
Elm, PureScript, they're all very cool, but interop for strongly typed languages is way more cumbersome than it is for ClojureScript, right? ClojureScript is like you want to call something, you want to mutate something, you want to just you want to use a library that's on the page. These are all it requires nothing for us. It's just you can just do it, and that
Yeah.
and that and that and that to us was important that there shouldn't be that much friction.
Also,
The,
one thing
the,
that
yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm done.
Okay. So one of the things is Elm and in some way PureScript, they didn't make it easy to import libraries from the rest of the JavaScript world. It was seen like impure, unsafe. You actually had to like add it's unsafe. And when you speak about like CoffeeScript, for example, a transpiler, I was prior using Clojure, or even when I was using Clojure on backend, I was using a language called LiveScript, which
Oh
was
yeah,
so
LiveScript. I remember. Yeah.
LiveScript. So basically, there was a fork of CoffeeScript called Coco, which added Perl syntax or parts of it. And there was LiveScript, which was inspired by Haskell, OCaml, and
Yeah,
there
yeah.
was Prelude, which was queried and basically a copy of the standard library of Haskell. I built BPMN, like business process modeling editor in LiveScript on a huge canvas. We were dragging those boxes, making arrows. The TV signal in the Czech Republic, the biggest provider of the TV signal, is actually using this as their
Oh,
editor to design
cool.
processes.
Very
Uh,
cool.
so it was as functional as possible. And the good thing is actually you could interact with the whole JavaScript ecosystem. There is
Yeah.
no price to pay. While
Yeah.
when you are working with Elm or PureScript, it's a different world. There is the garden between like Clojure and JVM. You still have to when you want purely functional code, that you have to wrap things, you have to hide that there are objects somehow. But
Yeah.
besides that, it's easy. But with PureScript and Elm, you lose many advantages of
Yeah.
like such a strongly typed language. And so people were in a situation where you either build everything within the language and you ignore all the libraries and so on, or you use
Yeah.
something more mainstream and have all the libraries for your disposal. Um,
Yeah.
so back to ClojureScript. So are there any big changes, big things coming in ClojureScript, or you think ClojureScript is stable and
There's a few things we're working on. I mean, there's long things we've been talking about for a long time. Like for example, it would be nice to have generic arithmetic, like like Clojure does. It'd be nice to figure out some way to get big ints in there because JavaScript has big ints and make it work in the arithmetic, the math, the numerical tower.
yeah,
That's I've done some experiments. We haven't figured that out. So that's something that's been sitting around for a long time. Like, can we get the sort of numerical tower more like Clojure? That's one thing. Probably not going to happen anytime soon, but it's something we continue to think about. Another thing we've been talking about is like managing global requires, like the fact that like there's this convention in ClojureScript where you can go JS slash and you can refer to global things, but it's a bit strange and then it's not very disciplined. And so we were thinking like it would be nice. It's a very minor thing, but you should be able to both access JavaScript objects that are available in the host environment, whether that's Node.js or really most likely the browser where there's lots of global objects, that you could treat some global object as a library. I mean, there's huge for that. It's like not so much like programming the large, but I think there's lots of benefits for like, one developer who's making, a small project on their own and they want to access some script tag that they loaded, right? The
yeah,
thing about it is that like doing JavaScript development is really burdensome. Whereas in the old days, you wrote the source file and you put a script tag and that's it. And actually,
yeah,
in ClojureScript, you can, you do have
yeah,
to set up the thing, but really you just put one script tag and ClojureScript loads, right? And it would be great if you could be like, just put a script tag for the other library that you need, and you write your ClojureScript code, and you're done. Like,
yeah,
I think people have sort of forgotten that there are modes of development that don't need fancy build processes and bundlers and all this stuff. Um,
yeah,
I just don't think it's necessary, and I think that in ClojureScript we should embrace that there are definitely use cases where you don't need that. But wouldn't it be cool if you could do what you're doing and have a REPL? That's awesome, right? So it's
yeah,
mostly pluses, no fewer negatives. Um, and I'm sure there's other things like this that we've been thinking about, but no, there's no really big things other than that, I would say, in the immediate future.
yes, yes. One thing that comes to my mind is software transaction memory is a closure thing. And when you are working with outside libraries, they will use mutable data structures. Is it a problem when you are building an application where your data structures use STM and libraries you interact with do not?
I mean, from ClojureScript, I mean, a couple of things. Like in Clojure, actually, the STM was really cool. It's really cool, and there are occasionally use cases for it, but they're quite rare, actually.
Huh,
I personally have never used it. I've never had an occasion to use the STM. And in ClojureScript, we don't need it. ClojureScript just atoms. You just have atoms. That's the only sort of like sort of native state management construct that there is, and it's sufficient. Um, so yeah, I can't say too much about that. I'm gonna pause here just for a second, just to say that I am running a bit short on time. So maybe we
yeah.
could look at the list of topics and just pick maybe one or two more that you absolutely want to hit before I have to wrap it up.
All right, all right. So I will have just last two questions.
Okay.
First, how does your workflow look like? What tools do you use? What editor and so on?
Yeah, so I've been an IntelliJ cursive user for a very long time now. I like it. I mean, I was using Emacs from like with Clojure from like the beginning. Like like
Yeah,
back when there was no tooling support, there was just a
yeah,
mode back there. I remember, there was a slime variant for Clojure. I worked on, I remember I did a little bit of hacking to like help get macro expanding working inside of the slime
Yeah,
swank closure, the slime swank closure thing. So I've seen many iterations of the Emacs tooling, and I liked it and enjoyed it. But there was a bit of churn in that space, and I got tired of that, and so I switched to
yeah,
cursive. From what I can tell, it's very stable now, and most of my
yeah,
complaints are gone. But at the time, because I was an early adopter, I had to feel the pain. But cursive has been pretty stable, and also, because of ClojureScript development, a lot of times you have to look at Google Clojure, which is a lot of Java, and so just having IntelliJ be able to quickly navigate Clojure and Java sources and
yeah,
JavaScript sources without me setting up a lot of config was a huge benefit. So I'm more or
yeah,
less stuck with it. I do use Emacs. I'm still a big Emacs user. I love org mode. I really like org mode. Sometimes I really like Magit. I don't even know what you call it. The
yeah,
the, the Git thing.
yeah,
I
I
love
get,
that thing. Yeah. So there are like killer apps in Emacs still that keep me using
yeah,
Emacs. Otherwise, I'm an OS 10. I'm a MacBook Air person. I really like small, light laptops. So I've more or less stuck with that. Um, I recently started using it's not perfect, but like Amethyst, which is like a tiling window manager for OS 10.
this,
Tiling window managers in OS 10 aren't perfect, but it still saves some hassle. And other than that, honestly, the most radical thing in recently is not non-technological. I've like really started doubling down on physical notebooks, like actual pen and paper. So experimenting with keeping that alongside my digital note taking, and I feel
yeah,
like it's very interesting to like be into mutability and like the journal. A physical journal is very much is an append only
yeah,
log by design. There's also something for me, I'm not sure it's true for everybody, um, but just writing things down. Like it's funny, like there are things where I think I have like my memory amazes myself when I'm looking at like the ClojureScript code base. I'm like shocked how much I remember where everything is, but there's so many things in my life where it's like I can't remember the thing I was doing 5 minutes ago. And so I
yeah,
found that for other things besides actually like doing software, a physical notebook has been really great for sort of arranging the things
yeah,
I have to do. So
yeah.
that would say that's the biggest change to the way that I work.
I'm stationary nerd myself. I love
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
notebooks, and
Yes.
they have
Yes.
dots. They have small
Yeah.
dots.
Yeah. Yeah. So the dot grid.
Okay, yeah,
I'm now a fan of the dot grid. Yeah.
yeah. And then these pens,
Yeah.
Uniball
Yes. Yes.
I,
Yes. Yes.
and these
I
are,
micros. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, last question. So, how can people support you?
I mean, honestly, just use ClojureScript. Use ClojureScript. ClojureScript. I mean, the thing that kept me going, like, there's like been ups and downs with ClojureScript for sure over the years. I mean, there was a time I was like, nobody's like, I can't even get Clojure people to use this thing. And then
Yeah,
React was like a lucky break. But honestly, that's always been the most rewarding thing is people at conferences or in person, people just come up to me like, thank you. Like, I've been using ClojureScript for this. I'm using ClojureScript for that. So it always makes me happy when people are succeeding with ClojureScript. I mean, I would say that's like the best support that anybody could give. I've put a lot of my life into ClojureScript, and yeah, hearing that people are enjoying it and they're being successful with it is a huge
yeah.
reward.
Thank you too, by the way. We have built plenty of apps in ClojureScript, both on front end and also mobile apps with
Cool.
Renatal.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
nice, very nice.
still waiting for the first Node.js app in
Yeah.
ClojureScript, but this will come sooner or later. Okay then, thank you very much. It was a
Yes.
pleasure to meet you, and hopefully let's do some interview again in the future.
Yes, that would be great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.